Welcome back. You're still watching World Inside with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you live on CGTN. Now, let's talk about China-U.S. trade tensions. Well, we have been talking about it for months so far. Former U.S. President Jimmy Carter was awarded recently for his role in developing U.S. China relations. He also spoke to President Donald Trump about China, but Trump stressed that he concerned about China becoming a superpower. However, Chinese leaders have repeatedly dismissed China's status as a superpower, no matter how far the country has come. Can the world's biggest economies find some common ground and to avoid real conflict? Before we go to our panelists from both China and the U.S., let's take a look at this first.
On Wednesday, former U.S. President Jimmy Carter was awarded the inaugural George H.W. Bush Award for statesmanship in U.S. China relations, recognizing his role in establishing China-U.S. diplomatic ties more than 40 years ago. Recently, the former U.S. president also shared his experience in dealing with China with President Trump in a recent letter, saying the United States has spent trillions of dollars on wars in the past years, while China has invested in projects such as high-speed rails that benefit its people.
Well, let's look at what it means to be a superpower. Not just who has the most powerful military, but who is a champion of the finest things in life.
However, when commenting on the Chinese mobile giant Huawei, U.S. Vice President Mike Pence said the company represents a fundamental compromise to both U.S. national security and that of its allies. Pence backed the stance taken by the U.S. Commerce Department last month when it added Huawei to its list of entities that pose a risk to U.S. national security or foreign policy interests. Elsewhere, U.S. President Donald Trump recently said that China's economy has been seriously hurt by the tariffs. Both Huawei and the Chinese government have said the Trump administration is misleading the public. In fact, according to the latest official data, in the first 5 months of this year, China's actual use of foreign capital saw an increase of 3.7% year-on-year, and manufacturing utilization of foreign investment increased by 8.3%.
These data demonstrate the strong confidence of foreign investors in the Chinese economy and the Chinese market. China is still the most attractive investment hotspot in the world.
Some say the statesmanship the former presidents demonstrated in developing the U.S.-China ties should set an example for modern-day leaders.
For more on what's going on between China and the United States, in our Beijing studio, Huang Zhengyu, chairman of the Yu Capital and former White House fellow during the Obama years. Good to see you, sir. And also joining us in Beijing, Zhang Jianping, who is Director General at the Center for Regional Cooperation at the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation. Good to see you as well. Joining us in Washington, D.C., long time no see, Jeffrey Schott, Senior Fellow working on international trade policy and economic sanctions at the Peterson Institute for International Economics. I want to start with you, Mr. Schott. Long time no see. Good to see you once again, because we really cherish every frank American voice coming from the other parts of the world. Mr. Schott, you usually have a very fair attitude about what's going on between the two countries. Now help us to understand, are we already on the edge of something that should cause concern from both sides, Mr. Schott?
Well, it's good to see you again as well. When I was last on the program was the day that the talks broke down between the United States and China last month.
Exactly.
And since then, there's been a deepening divide since then between the United States and China, caused a lot by growing tensions in the high-tech area. This is troublesome. It should be a cause of concern for both countries. It is imposing costs on both countries because the tariff war is having an impact on investment. And even though you can cite stronger investment numbers in China, I suspect that some of that investment is less efficient than it should be and being put in redundant inventories or supply chains because of the disruptions due to the tariff war.
So you believe, Mr. Schott, we are probably in the danger of technological decoupling, or we are already at the very beginning of an apparent Cold War of some sort, as some being concerning about, Mr. Schott? What's your...
Well, certainly there is talk about more high-tech friction and decoupling. But as the United States looks into it more deeply and begins to implement the new laws that were promulgated last year to screen foreign investment in the United States and to increase restrictions on exports of technology, I think the U.S. Officials are seeing the complications in restricting technological trade in an era of globalization. It's a lot harder than it was during the Cold War with the Soviet Union.
Mr. Huang, though, we heard from even business communities in the U.S. talking about, what about the example of Huawei? In a way, it is diminishing the credibility of American companies providing components and parts to global businesses, because it shows once the American government says one thing, all the American business have to follow suit, no matter what the earlier contracts were. So it's destabilizing, in a way, the credibility of American companies. But having said that, though, will these voices still relevant and matter under the current political environment in Washington and probably even beyond?
Well, I think we have to realize that just a short few weeks ago, we were that close to getting an agreement signed.
I'm not sure whether we are that close or not. According to the media report,
President Trump tweeted about inviting, President Xi to the Rose Garden for a signing. Well, he tweeted
many things if you look at his record.
But the fact is, the underlying dynamics for a trade deal is still there. And the last 40 years, if we really look at what happened between U.S. and China, China benefited tremendously from the U.S., and the U.S. benefited tremendously from China.
So what are you trying to say here?
What I'm trying to say is the dynamics and the underlying connectivities are still there. And even though the rhetorics are high, the words are huge, let's not forget that there's still so much interconnectivity.
There is synergy, no doubt about that. But, would that really matter anymore, Mr. Zhang? Because some are concerned, once politics plays a dominant role, it is very dangerous that the others will have to be deprioritized in a way. Because now there are voices in Washington getting ever bigger, or trying to get ever bigger, about the geopolitics plays a much bigger role than, make sure there's sustainable economic cooperation between China and the United States, because they are saying, well, the U.S. position will be further challenged by China, and that's going to be fearful for everyone. At least that was what they were saying.
Indeed. Right now, if you look at the political atmosphere in Washington, D.C., actually, they need to, Trump administration still trying to provide, strongest pressure on Chinese side in order to get, a better interest in the future. Meanwhile, also Huawei case also shows that the U.S. didn't want to see a stronger, competitors in global market in high-tech sectors. Also, my concern is that nowadays, actually, so-called decoupling issues that would be very dangerous, thinking and action, because today between China and the U.S. we already linked. By global supply chain, global value chain. In case that you want to, decoupling. That means, who will pay, so big cost in the future.
But does it matter? I mean, does it matter in politics, Mr. Schott? Who cares? I mean, politicians get re-elections. That's what they care. Whether who is going to pay for it, they're not going to pay for it. So, Mr. Shao, what Mr. Zhang, the reasoning, the three of you here, beautiful, but do they matter anymore these days? I mean, we are probably not just the chit-chat talking about the reasons behind what's going on, but rather the realities here.
Well, they do matter in the sense that it is having an impact on both the U.S. and the Chinese economy and those of many of our trading partners in the region. It's having an impact on productivity. It will lead to wasted or less efficient investment, which will be a drag on growth going forward. And so it's something that both the United States and China should try to avoid. But I think the point that you made that in Washington, the clear eye is on the 2020 election, and both parties have concerns and skepticism about doing business with China. And so that's what is feeding at least some of the reactions in the White House.
Mr. Shah, another judgment I would love to hear your thought is whether the U.S., quote unquote, the U.S., as if it's a piece, one piece, but as you may know, it's not. There are so many different interest groups and different ways of thinking. But if the U.S. or not already come to consensus about how to deal with China, that is a topic many Chinese are extremely fascinated about. Some say yes already, long time already. Others say, well, maybe not yet. What's your judgment here? Is there still a way to be able to make things happen?
I think many constituencies, many groups in the United States have a vested interest in seeing better relations with China for the very reasons that Mr. Huang and Dr. Zhang mentioned. Our economies are interrelated. We benefit from stronger ties, economic ties with each other, but we have to manage the relationship to ensure that it's sustainable. And the trade negotiations were moving in that direction. I think there's an interest in both sides, perhaps the heads of state in calling a ceasefire when hopefully they meet at the G20 meeting later this month. But the political climate in both countries is making it harder to find a way to have an agreement that is sustainable over time. And that's something that business and other groups in both countries have to work to find a solution.
Both of you, your responses, Mr.
I'd just like to emphasize on one point, that is today, if you look at China, we have a very comprehensive, completed industrial system, from low end to mid end to high end. Also, from raw material to parts to final products. So in other if you look at other countries, there is no other country like China today. Even if in the United States, they just mainly focusing on high-tech sectors, very high value-added parts. In this case, you can find that okay, U.S. can prohibit chips to China. You may find that what type of place they can sell those chips. So that's a big problem.
So you're saying China is okay, whether you sell us or not?
No, of course, China.
Is that what you're saying? No,
China will suffer from maybe trade diversion effect, and maybe suffering from unemployment issues to some extent. But please pay attention that today, actually China's economic growth rate, mainly relying on domestic demand instead of international demand.
So Mr. Zhang, if I could be direct here, that is, do you think many Chinese still think about whether the U.S. is thinking giving China space to development or giving both to cooperate, or China has already decided, many Chinese, that no matter what happens, we're going to go our own way? What is your sense, if people watching this program coming from afar, what have the Chinese decided?
My observation,
or have they decided?
Yeah. I think that in the past 4 decades, based on quite positive, constructive relationship between China and the U.S., definitely U.S. side provided a very big space to promote both China and the U.S. development. But right now, U.S. policy tools is too extreme. to make China's development. So that's why today, actually, not only from Chinese side, but also from other trade partners, we are not support U.S. trade policy.
Mr. Huang.
Well, first, to address a point you made earlier, the economy does matter. Politicians get elected and unelected
well, in the
based
long
on
term, but what about in
the
the short
economy.
term? You got a less than.
The short term, what we're facing is this great economic conundrum. We see in the United States, the Federal Reserve has been pumping out money, yet we still have growth about 3%, unemployment at historical low about 3%, and no price inflation. No price inflation. And you can argue that's similarly happening in China.
In a way, posing the challenge that the short-term economic prospect is going to be good for politicians to maneuver and to manipulate even. Therefore, there could be the possibility things are getting worse before it could ever get better.
I think what happens as in a negotiation between two people is if their tactic is to punch the other person, hoping to bring the other person to the table, and it turns out that both could actually suffer each other. And so what we see is we might be at a stalemate, except with an escalation of words.
Is it tactics or already strategies, what you're seeing right now, Washington's attitude towards Beijing and China? Mr. Shaw.
Well, it's hard to differentiate between the two.
Wow, there's a huge difference between the two.
I think there are advisors in the White House. Well, yeah, but there are advisors in the White House who are giving priority to the security and defense concerns, others who are looking at the longer-term economic relationship. And I suspect that the president feels fairly comfortable that he can withstand the pain in the United States from the trade war because the economy is doing as well as Mr. Huang said. But the economy is also doing fairly well in China. There, I think the biggest challenge is how do you sustain that growth, and the Chinese need more economic reform to boost productivity. That's the drag that's the threat to the Chinese economy over time.
Yeah.
Right.
And to answer your point, the decoupling has already happened. If you're in China, you use Weibo, Weixin. If you're in the United States, you use Google, Facebook, Instagram. So on the application level, that's already happened. What we might see is the decoupling down the different levels to operating system, semiconductors, even standards.
Of course.
Now that's what I would worry.
To the fabrics that
that's what I would worry the most. If I can't carry my technology product and go anywhere in the world and use it anywhere in the world, that to me as a consumer would be detrimental. And that might be what's going to happen.
All right. Well, before we go, I would love to briefly invite your opinions about how do you see relationships short-term, long-term? Do we still need to think about the long-term anymore, given the daily drama, if not daily dramas, that we're seeing right now? This is not a joke, but rather, when we look at the world today, what should we think about it? Long-term or short-term only? Mr. Shaw, I know you have a lot of serious thoughts about these questions because we were talking to each other earlier about them. Briefly, if you can, what exactly shall we look at? What kind of time frame are you looking at?
Well, I think there's going to be friction certainly through the U.S. election in November of 2020. But thoughtful people in both countries need to give priority to the importance of working together because the United States and China have to work together on many important international issues, including North Korea, including how to deal with Iran and avoid war in the Middle East. So these are things that the United States and China need to be working together, and hopefully that projection will continue.
I see. Dr. Zhang? Short term, long term, do we need to think about even the long term anymore?
In short term, we have to face with a trade friction. In the long term, I do believe that both China and the U.S. Will have enough wisdom to seek rational and constructive relationship.
We hope that is the case. Mr. Huang, final words?
Well, at the table we have Americans and Chinese, but in the end we're all humans. And we have issues as climate change the advent of artificial intelligence, food security, nuclear nonproliferation.
And the list
goes
on.
These are human issues.
Right.
And we need the two countries to work together.
Well, I'm not sure whether the policymakers are as philosophical as you are, but for now I want to thank the three of you for being with us. Jeffrey Schott, Zhang Jianping, Huang Zhengyu. Really appreciate the voices from both China and the United States. We need to hear both sides. Thank you so much, gentlemen. That is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for more insights across China and around the world. And have a great weekend, everyone.